The headlights cut through the November fog like knives through smoke, illuminating the winding country road that connected my apartment in Eugene to the small coastal town where my sister lived. I had made this drive 100 times, usually looking forward to weekend visits filled with her famous blackberry cobbler and long walks along the beach. This time dread sat in my chest like a stone. Sarah had called me 3 hours earlier, her voice strange and distant, saying she needed to talk about something important but refusing to elaborate over the phone. Then she stopped answering her phone entirely. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I told myself I was overreacting as I navigated the curves of Highway 126, my knuckles white against the steering wheel. Sarah was probably fine. Maybe her phone died. Maybe she fell asleep waiting for me. Maybe the important thing she wanted to discuss was something simple, like marriage troubles she felt embarrassed to mention over the phone. But the fear that had seized me when her calls went straight to voicemail would not release its grip. The fog grew thicker as I approached the coast, reducing visibility to perhaps 50 feet. I slowed down, leaning forward as if those few inches would help me see better through the wall of gray. The road here ran parallel to steep embankments on one side, dropping down to rocky creek beds that filled with rushing water during winter storms. In summer, these ditches were mostly dry, filled with tall grass and blackberry brambles. That was when I saw it, a dark shape in the ditch that did not belong. At first, I thought it might be a deer that had been struck by a car, but something about the form made my heart stutter. I slammed on my brakes, the car skidding slightly on the damp pavement before stopping. I threw the transmission into park and grabbed my phone, turning on the flashlight as I stumbled out of the car. The beam of light swept across the embankment, and that was when I saw her. My sister Sarah, lying motionless in the ditch 15 feet below the road. Her body twisted at an angle that made my stomach lurch. I screamed her name, my voice cracking with terror as I half ran, half slid down the muddy slope toward her. She was wearing the blue cardigan I had given her for her birthday, now torn and covered in mud. Her face was barely recognizable, swollen and bruised, with blood matting her blonde hair to her scalp. But her chest was moving. She was breathing. I dropped to my knees beside her, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone steady. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glassy with pain. Her lips moved, forming words I had to lean close to hear. Her voice was barely a whisper, wet and labored, each word clearly causing agony. It was my husband. For words that shattered my world and set everything that followed into motion. For words that transformed me from an elementary school teacher, living a quiet life, into someone who would spend the next year fighting for justice with a ferocity I did not know I possessed. For words that revealed the truth my sister had been hiding behind cheerful phone calls and carefully angled photographs that never showed both her and Marcus in the same frame. My brother-in-law had tried to kill her, and somehow, impossibly, she had survived. The emergency responders arrived within 12 minutes of my 911 call, though it felt like hours. I knelt beside Sarah in that muddy ditch, afraid to move her but terrified that not moving her might be worse. My hands hovered uselessly over her broken body as I tried to remember anything from the first aid training I had taken years ago as part of my teaching certification. Keep her warm. Do not move her if there is spinal injury. Apply pressure to bleeding wounds. The instructions swirled in my head, but none of them seemed adequate for the catastrophe in front of me. Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness during those 12 minutes. Each time her eyes opened, they searched for something, finally settling on my face with recognition that brought fresh tears streaming down my cheeks. I kept talking to her, saying anything that came into my head. I told her the paramedics were coming. I told her she was going to be okay. I told her I loved her. I told her to stay with me, to keep breathing, to hold on just a little longer. The third time she regained consciousness, she grabbed my hand with surprising strength. Her fingers dug into my palm as she pulled me closer, her breath coming in painful gasps that suggested broken ribs or worse. He pushed me, she whispered, each word costing her something. Off the cliff. Behind the house. I crawled. All the way here. Had to warn you. Ice flooded my veins. Warn me about what? He knows. That I was going to tell. He said you are next if anyone finds out. Her grip on my hand tightened even more. Do not go to my house. Promise me. Before I could respond, the flashing lights of the ambulance appeared through the fog, followed seconds later by a sheriff's department vehicle. The paramedics moved with practiced efficiency, their hands gentle but swift as they assessed Sarah's injuries and prepared to move her. I heard fragments of their conversation, medical terminology I did not understand, but that sounded serious. Possible internal bleeding, definite concussion, multiple fractures, severe hypothermia. A young deputy with a serious face approached me as the paramedics worked. His name tag read Chun, and his dark eyes were sharp despite the late hour. He held a small notebook and a pen, the tools of his profession as essential as my sister's injuries were catastrophic. Ma'am, can you tell me what happened here? His voice was professionally neutral, giving nothing away. I opened my mouth to repeat what Sarah had told me, but something made me hesitate. My brother-in-law Marcus Hendricks was a well-respected contractor in this small coastal community. He had lived here his entire life, had gone to high school with half the people in town, including probably this deputy. He served on the city council. He coached youth soccer. Everyone loved Marcus. And he had just tried to murder my sister. Would this deputy believe me if I accused Marcus? Or would he think Sarah's injuries were from an accident, her accusations the product of head trauma and confusion? I made a split-second decision to be vague, to wait until I understood the situation better. I found her like this. She called me a few hours ago and asked me to come visit, but then she stopped answering her phone. When I got to this part of the road, I saw her in the ditch. All of this was true, just incomplete. Did she say what happened? She was barely conscious. I could not understand most of what she said. This was a lie, but I told myself it was a protective one. I needed time to think, to figure out the right way to handle this. Deputy Chun made notes in his book, then looked back at me with an expression that suggested he knew I was holding something back but was not going to push for now. Do you know if your sister has any medical conditions? Anything the paramedics should know about? I shook my head, then remembered. She is allergic to sulfa drugs. And she is 3 months pregnant. The deputy's pen stopped moving. Pregnant? Yes. She told me last month. She and her husband were really excited. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. Marcus had known his wife was carrying his child when he pushed her off a cliff. The paramedics had Sarah on a backboard now, securing her neck and preparing to lift her up the steep embankment to the waiting ambulance. One of them, a woman with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, called over to Deputy Chun. We need to transport immediately. She is critical. We are taking her to Bay Area Hospital in Coos Bay. Coos Bay was 45 minutes away, the nearest facility with a trauma center capable of handling injuries this severe. Deputy Chun nodded and turned back to me. I am going to need more information from you, but it can wait until your sister is stabilized. Will you be going to the hospital? Yes, of course. I will meet you there in a few hours to take a formal statement. In the meantime, I need to notify next of kin. Is your sister married? There it was, the question I had been dreading. I could lie, could claim I did not know how to reach Marcus, could buy myself time to figure out what to do. But withholding information from law enforcement about a potential crime was serious. I thought about Sarah's terrified whisper, her insistence that Marcus would come after me next if anyone found out. I thought about her broken body and the baby that might not survive. I made my choice. Her husband is Marcus Hendricks. They live at 4847 Cliffview Drive. I paused, then added, but deputy, there is something you should know. My sister told me that Marcus pushed her. She said he tried to kill her. Deputy Chin's expression shifted from neutral professionalism to sharp attention. His pen moved across the notebook again, faster now. She specifically said her husband pushed her? Yes. She said he pushed her off the cliff behind their house, and she crawled all the way to the road. She also said he knows she was going to tell someone something, and that he threatened to hurt me if she spoke to anyone. The words tumbled out now, unstoppable. She begged me not to go to her house. The deputy studied my face for a long moment, perhaps assessing my credibility or my mental state. Then he radioed something to the sheriff's vehicle, using codes I did not understand. Within seconds, another deputy appeared from the vehicle, this one older with weathered skin and gray stubble. Deputy Chun spoke rapidly to his colleague. keeping his voice low enough that I could not hear most of it. I caught fragments. Domestic violence. Attempted homicide. Secure the residence. The older deputy nodded grimly and returned to his vehicle, pulling out onto the road with lights flashing but no siren. "Ma'am, I need you to understand something," Deputy Chan said, his tone more grave than before. "If your sister's husband did this, then she may still be in danger if he realizes she survived. You may be in danger as well, especially if he made threats against you. I am sending a deputy to the residence now, but I need you to stay away from there, just like your sister asked. Do you understand?" I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Do you have somewhere safe you can stay tonight? Somewhere that Marcus Hendricks does not know about? I thought about my apartment in Eugene, 90 miles away. Marcus had been there once 2 years ago when he and Sarah helped me move in. He knew the address, knew what building I lived in, knew that I lived alone. Suddenly my safe, familiar apartment felt like a trap. I can go to my friend Rachel's house. She lives in Eugene too, but Marcus has never been there. Rachel was my closest friend from college, someone I trusted absolutely. She would take me in without questions, would help me figure out what to do next. Good. Go to the hospital first, make sure your sister is stable, but then I want you to go to your friend's place and stay there until we figure out what is going on. I will have an officer meet you at the hospital to get your full statement and to make sure you get out of town safely. The paramedics were loading Sarah into the ambulance now. I could see her face through the open doors, pale and still, an oxygen mask covering her nose and mouth. I needed to be with her. "I have to go," I said, already moving toward my car. "One more thing," Deputy Chung called after me. "What is your name?" "Emma. Emma Reeves." I drove to Coos Bay on autopilot, following the ambulance's flashing lights through the fog. My mind spun with questions that had no answers. How long had Marcus been hurting Sarah? Why had she never told me? What was she planning to tell me tonight that had provoked this attack? And most urgently, was she going to survive? The Bay Area Hospital Emergency Department was a blur of fluorescent lights and antiseptic smells. I gave Sarah's information to the registration desk, showed my identification to prove I was immediate family, and was directed to a waiting area where a television played the news to an empty room. I sat in an orange plastic chair that was bolted to the floor, and tried not to imagine what was happening to my sister behind those locked double doors marked authorized personnel only. An hour passed. Then two. A doctor finally emerged. A tired-looking woman in her 50s with kind eyes and purple scrubs. She sat down next to me and took my hand in hers, a gesture that made my heart plummet. "Your sister is alive," she said, and I exhaled for what felt like the first time in hours. "But her injuries are severe. She has a fractured skull, 3 broken ribs, a punctured lung, a shattered collarbone, and extensive internal bleeding that required emergency surgery. We have stabilized her for now, but the next 48 hours are critical." "The baby?" I asked, though I already knew from her expression. "I am so sorry. We could not save the pregnancy. The trauma was too extensive." I bent forward, pressing my forehead against my knees as grief washed over me. Sarah had been so happy about that baby. She had shown me the ultrasound pictures on her phone, pointing out tiny features I could not distinguish. She had already picked out names. Olivia Rose for a girl, James Robert for a boy. Now that future was gone, stolen by the man who should have protected both of them. "Can I see her?" I managed to ask. "She is heavily sedated and will be for some time. We needed to induce a medical coma to reduce swelling in her brain. She will not know you are there." "I need to see her anyway. Please." The doctor nodded and led me through the locked doors into the intensive care unit. We passed rooms where machines beeped and hissed, where other families kept vigil beside other patients fighting for life. She stopped at room 407 and gently pushed open the door. Nothing could have prepared me for the sight of Sarah connected to so many machines. Tubes ran from her arms, her chest, her throat. Monitors displayed numbers and waves I could not interpret. Her face was so swollen I would not have recognized her if I had passed her on the street. But it was her. My sister. My only sibling. The person who had taught me how to braid my hair, and how to stand up to bullies and how to make her famous blackberry cobbler. I pulled a chair close to her bedside and took her hand, careful to avoid the 4-line taped to her skin. The doctor quietly left, giving me privacy. I sat there in the mechanical breathing of the ventilator and the steady beep of the heart monitor, and I made promises to my unconscious sister. I promised her that Marcus would be held accountable for what he had done. I promised her that she would never have to be afraid of him again. I promised her that I would find out why this happened and make sure the truth came out. I promised her that I would protect her the way she had always protected me when we were kids. And I promised myself that I would not rest until justice was done, no matter how long it took or what it cost me. Marcus Hendricks had tried to destroy my sister and her unborn child. He had turned a foggy November night into a nightmare. He had revealed himself as a monster hiding behind a respectable facade. But he had made one crucial mistake. He had let Sarah survive. And now she had a sister who would fight for her with everything she had. A nurse came in to check Sarah's vitals, moving efficiently around the equipment. She smiled at me with professional compassion. "Are you planning to stay the night?" "Yes," I said. "I am not leaving her. I will bring you a blanket and pillow. The chair reclines if you want to try to get some rest." Rest seemed impossible, but I thanked her anyway. After she left, I pulled out my phone and texted Rachel, giving her a brief outline of what had happened and asking if I could stay with her for a while. Her response came within seconds, full of shock and immediate support. Of course she would help. Whatever I needed. She would clear out her guest room tonight. I also texted my principal at Cascade Elementary, explaining that I had a family emergency and would need to take leave for at least a few weeks. I taught second grade, and while I loved my students, they would have to manage with a substitute teacher while I focused on Sarah's recovery and the legal battle I knew was coming. Then I sat back in that uncomfortable hospital chair and stared at my sister's battered face, and I let myself cry for the first time since finding her in that ditch. I cried for her pain and her lost baby. I cried for the sister I thought I knew, who had hidden the truth about her marriage behind cheerful phone calls. I cried for my own fear and shock and rage. But when the tears finally stopped, something harder and colder settled in my chest. Determination. Purpose. A clarity of mission that I had never experienced before. Marcus Hendricks thought he could get away with attempted murder. He thought his position in the community and his respectable reputation would protect him. He thought that pushing his pregnant wife off a cliff would solve whatever problem she represented. He was about to discover just how wrong he was, because Sarah had survived. And she had a sister who would make sure everyone knew exactly what kind of man Marcus Hendricks really was. The night stretched ahead of me, long and dark and filled with the sounds of machines keeping my sister alive. But morning would come eventually. And when it did, the real fight would begin. The first rays of dawn filtered through the hospital blinds, painting Sarah's room in shades of gray and pale gold. I had not slept, despite the nurse's kindness in bringing me a blanket and adjusting the chair to recline. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my sister's broken body in that ditch, heard her labored whisper warning me about Marcus, felt the terror of those 12 minutes waiting for the ambulance to arrive. Sleep seemed like a luxury I could not afford when Sarah remained unconscious, fighting for her life with machines doing half the work her body could not manage on its own. A different doctor came in around 6 in the morning to check on Sarah's progress. This one was younger, maybe in his early 40s, with tired eyes that suggested he had been working the night shift. He studied the monitors with practiced efficiency, made notes on a tablet, and then turned to me with an expression I could not quite read. "I am Dr. Patel, the neurosurgeon who operated on your sister last night. We had to relieve pressure on her brain caused by swelling from the skull fracture. The surgery went as well as could be expected given the circumstances, but the next 24 to 48 hours remain critical. We are keeping her in the induced coma to give her brain time to heal without additional stress." "When will you wake her up?" I asked, my voice rough from disuse and crying. "That depends entirely on how she responds over the next day or two. We will be monitoring her intracranial pressure constantly. If the swelling decreases and her other injuries begin to stabilize, we may attempt to reduce the sedation gradually. But I need to be honest with you about the severity of her condition. Your sister sustained massive trauma. Even if she survives, and I am cautiously optimistic that she will, There may be lasting effects. Brain injuries are unpredictable. The words hung in the air between us like a death sentence postponed but not cancelled. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak without breaking down again. Dr. Patel put a hand on my shoulder, a gesture of comfort that somehow made everything feel more real and more terrible. "The police want to speak with you," he said quietly. "Deputy Chun is waiting outside." I told him he could have 10 minutes, no more. "You need rest, and your sister needs you to take care of yourself so you can be here for her recovery." Deputy Chun entered the room moments after Dr. Patel left, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the hospital cafeteria. He handed me one without asking if I wanted it, which I appreciated because I definitely needed it even though I had not realized it until the warm cup was in my hands. He pulled another chair close to mine and sat down, pulling out the same small notebook from the night before. "How is she doing?" he asked, glancing at Sarah's still form. "Critical but stable. They operated on her brain. She might have permanent damage." Saying it out loud made it more real, more terrifying. Deputy Chun nodded gravely, then opened his notebook to a fresh page. "I need to get your full statement about what happened last night. Everything your sister told you and everything you observed. But before we start, I want you to know that we arrested Marcus Hendricks approximately 3 hours ago." The coffee cup nearly slipped from my hands. "You arrested him?" When officers arrived at the Hendricks residence on Cliffview Drive, they found evidence consistent with your sister's account. There are clear signs of a struggle at the edge of the cliff behind the house. We found blood on the rocks, broken vegetation showing where someone slid down the embankment, and a trail leading away from the property toward the road where you found your sister. We also found your sister's cell phone smashed on the patio, along with what appears to be the weapon Marcus used to incapacitate her before pushing her over the edge. My hand started shaking again, nearly spilling the coffee. "What weapon?" "A wine bottle. It has blood and hair on it consistent with your sister's injuries, and we found it partially hidden in the outdoor trash can. Marcus had not yet disposed of it properly, which suggests this was not premeditated but rather an escalation of an argument that got out of control." I thought about Sarah's warning that Marcus knew she was planning to tell me something. That suggested some level of planning or at least awareness that a confrontation was coming. But I kept that thought to myself for now, focusing on what Deputy Chun was telling me. "Where is Marcus now?" "He is in custody at the county jail. He will be arraigned tomorrow morning on charges of attempted murder, assault in the first degree, and unlawful termination of pregnancy. Given the severity of the charges and the strength of the evidence, I expect the judge will deny bail. He is not going anywhere." Relief flooded through me so powerfully that I actually felt dizzy. Marcus was in jail. He could not hurt Sarah again. He could not come after me. For the moment at least we were safe from him. "Now I need you to tell me everything from the beginning. Start with your sister's phone call yesterday evening." I walked Deputy Chun through the entire sequence of events, starting with Sarah's strange call around 4 in the afternoon. I told him how she had sounded off, her voice tight and stressed in a way that was completely unlike her usually cheerful demeanor. She had asked me to come to the coast as soon as possible because she needed to talk to me about something important. But when I pressed her for details, she had been evasive. She just kept saying it had to be in person, that she could not talk about it over the phone. I told her I would leave Eugene right after I finished my lesson planning for the next day, and packed an overnight bag. I expected to get to her house around 8 or 8:30, but when I tried to call her around 6 to let her know I was leaving, her phone went straight to voicemail. "Did you find that unusual?" "Very. Sarah always keeps her phone charged and always answers when I call. We are close, or at least I thought we were." The words carried a weight of sadness and guilt. How had I missed the signs that my sister was in danger? What kind of sister failed to notice that her sibling was being abused? Deputy Chun must have read something in my expression because his voice gentlened slightly. Domestic violence victims often go to great lengths to hide what is happening to them. "It is not your fault that you did not see it." I nodded but did not really believe him. I should have seen something. Some sign. Some indication that Marcus was not the perfect husband he pretended to be. I continued with my account, describing the foggy drive, the moment I spotted Sarah in the ditch, the terror of sliding down that muddy embankment to reach her. Deputy Chun took notes steadily, occasionally asking clarifying questions about timing or specific details. When I got to the part about Sarah's whispered accusations against Marcus, he underlined something in his notebook multiple times. And she specifically said he pushed her off the cliff behind their house? Yes. She said he pushed her, and that she crawled all the way to the road. She also said he knew she was planning to tell someone something, and that he threatened to hurt me if she talked. She made me promise not to go to their house. Did she say what she was planning to tell you? What information Marcus was trying to keep her from sharing? I shook my head. She lost consciousness again before she could explain. But it must have been something serious if Marcus was willing to kill her to keep it quiet. Deputy Chun made more notes, then looked up at me with an expression that suggested he was about to share something significant. When we arrested Marcus, he claimed your sister's fall was an accident. He said they had been drinking wine on the patio, that Sarah got upset about something related to her pregnancy and ran toward the cliff edge, and that when he tried to grab her to stop her, she slipped and fell. He said he was about to call 911 when we arrived. Rage burned through my exhaustion. That is a lie. Sarah does not drink alcohol, especially not while pregnant. She has not had a drink since she found out she was expecting. And she would never run toward a cliff edge, even if she was upset. She is terrified of heights. We suspected as much, especially given the physical evidence at the scene. The blood pattern and the broken wine bottle suggest Marcus struck her first, probably from behind, then pushed her over the edge when she was already incapacitated. This was not an accident or a crime of passion. This was attempted murder. He flipped to a new page in his notebook. I need to ask you some questions about Marcus and Sarah's relationship. When did they get married? 4 years ago. They met at a community fundraiser for the local animal shelter. Sarah volunteers there on weekends and Marcus was one of the sponsors. He seemed really charming and attentive. He pursued her pretty intensely, sending flowers to her work, taking her to nice restaurants, making grand romantic gestures. They were engaged within 6 months and married 6 months after that. Did you have any concerns about him at the time? I hesitated, remembering my initial unease about how quickly their relationship had progressed. I thought things were moving fast, but Sarah seemed really happy. Marcus was successful, established in the community, well-liked by everyone who knew him. He seemed like a good match for her. My parents loved him immediately. Tell me about your parents. They died in a car accident 3 years ago. A drunk driver hit them head-on their way home from a concert in Portland. Sarah and I only have each other now, which is why I cannot understand how I missed the signs that something was wrong in her marriage. Deputy Chen's expression softened with sympathy. When did you last see Sarah in person before last night? About 3 weeks ago. I came to the coast for the weekend. We went to the beach, had dinner at her house, watched movies. Everything seemed fine. Marcus was there too and he seemed normal, friendly, loving towards Sarah. There was no indication that anything was wrong. Did you notice any bruises or injuries on your sister during that visit? I searched my memory trying to recall every detail of that weekend. Sarah had worn long sleeves despite the mild weather, which I had not thought much about at the time. She had also seemed more tired than usual, but I had attributed that to her pregnancy. Nothing obvious. But she wore long sleeves the entire time, even when we walked on the beach. I remember thinking it was a little strange, but I assumed she was just being careful about sun exposure because of the pregnancy. Was Marcus around during the entire visit? Most of it. He left for a few hours on Saturday afternoon for a work meeting, and Sarah and I had lunch together while he was gone. She seemed more relaxed when it was just the two of us. Did she say anything during that lunch that suggested she was having problems? I closed my eyes, trying to remember the conversation. We had talked about the pregnancy, about baby names, about whether they would convert the guest room or the office into a nursery. Sarah had seemed excited but also anxious in a way I had attributed to normal new mother nerves. She asked me a strange question. She asked if I thought it was possible to love someone and also be afraid of them at the same time. I thought she was talking about becoming a parent, about the fear of being responsible for another human being. Now I realize she was talking about Marcus. Deputy Chun underlined something else in his notebook. That is important. Did she say anything else that might be relevant? She mentioned that she and Marcus had been arguing more since she found out she was pregnant. She said he was stressed about money, about the responsibility of having a child, about whether they were ready. But she framed it as normal couple stuff, the kind of tension that comes with a major life change. I did not realize she was trying to tell me something more serious. Abusers are very good at making their victims believe the abuse is normal or deserved. They isolate their victims gradually, making them doubt their own perceptions. By the time the victim realizes they are in danger, they often feel trapped with no way out. The words hit me hard because they described exactly what must have happened to Sarah. Marcus had probably been controlling and manipulative from the beginning, but so gradually that Sarah did not recognize the danger until it was too late. And now she was lying in a hospital bed, fighting for her life, having lost the baby she had been so excited to welcome. What happens next with the case against Marcus? I asked. The district attorney will review the evidence and formally file charges. Given what we have, the physical evidence from the scene, your testimony about what Sarah told you, and the medical evidence of her injuries, this should be a strong case. But I need to be honest with you about something. The defense will argue that Sarah's statements to you are hearsay, and therefore inadmissible in court. The only way her accusations can be used as evidence is if she testifies herself. My stomach dropped. But she is in a coma. The doctors do not know when or if she will wake up. I understand. But even when she does wake up, assuming she recovers, the defense may argue that her memories of the attack are unreliable due to her head injury. They may claim she was confused or that trauma affected her recollection of events. We need to build a case that does not rely entirely on her testimony, which means finding other evidence of abuse or motive. What kind of evidence? Medical records showing previous injuries. Testimony from friends or family members who witnessed concerning behavior. Financial records if there were disputes about money. Text messages or emails that show the state of their relationship. Anything that establishes a pattern of abuse or gives Marcus a reason to want his wife dead. I thought about Sarah's phone, which Deputy Chan had mentioned finding smashed on the patio. Can you recover data from Sarah's phone? There might be text messages or emails that show what was happening in their relationship. Our tech team is working on it, but the phone is pretty badly damaged. We may not be able to retrieve everything. Do you know if your sister backed up her data anywhere? Cloud storage, a computer, anything like that? I have no idea. I do not even know her passwords for most things. Deputy Chan closed his notebook and stood up, draining the last of his coffee. Here is what I need from you. First, get some rest. You are no good to your sister if you run yourself into the ground. Second, go through your own phone and email. Send me any messages from Sarah, any photos, anything that might be relevant to understanding her relationship with Marcus. Third, make a list of anyone who knew Sarah well. Friends, coworkers, family members. We will need to interview them to see if anyone else noticed signs of abuse. What about Marcus's friends and coworkers? Someone must have seen something. We will be talking to them too, but here is the reality. Marcus is well liked in this community. He has a lot of people who will be shocked by these charges and who may be reluctant to believe he is capable of attempted murder. We need to be prepared for a difficult fight, both in court and in the court of public opinion. The thought of having to fight not just Marcus but an entire community that saw him as a pillar of society felt overwhelming. But I pushed that feeling aside, focusing on what needed to be done. I will do whatever it takes. Sarah deserves justice, and I am going to make sure she gets it. Deputy Chan handed me his card with his direct phone number and email address written on the back. Call me anytime, day or night, if you remember anything else or if you need help. I mean that. And be careful. Marcus is in custody for now, but he will have friends who might try to intimidate you or convince you to drop this. Do not let them. After he left, I sat alone with Sarah again, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest powered by the ventilator. The morning sun was fully up now, streaming through the windows and making the room feel almost peaceful despite the horror of why we were here. I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through my message history with Sarah, looking for anything that might be relevant to the case against Marcus. Most of our texts were mundane, conversations about weekend plans or sharing funny articles or checking in on each other's days. But as I scrolled back further, I started noticing patterns I had missed before. 3 months ago, Sarah had texted me to cancel plans we had made to visit the Portland Art Museum. She claimed she had come down with a stomach bug and did not want to make me sick. 2 months before that, she had canceled another visit, this time claiming Marcus had surprised her with anniversary plans. A month before that, she had suggested we talk on the phone instead of meeting up, because she was behind on work projects and needed the weekend to catch up. I had accepted all of these excuses at face value, never questioning whether Sarah actually wanted to see me but was being prevented from doing so. Now I saw them for what they were. Marcus systematically isolating Sarah from the people who cared about her, making it harder for her to ask for help or reveal what was happening behind closed doors. I found one text message from 6 weeks ago that made my blood run cold. Sarah had written late at night, asking if I ever felt like I was living someone else's life instead of my own. When I had asked what she meant, she had changed the subject and never brought it up again. I had assumed she was having normal existential doubts about marriage and impending motherhood. Now I understood she had been trying to tell me she felt trapped, that the life she was living with Marcus was not the life she wanted, but she had not known how to say it directly. I began forwarding these messages to Deputy Chen's email address, adding notes about context and dates. Then I opened my photo gallery and started looking through pictures of Sarah from the past year. In the earlier photos, she looked genuinely happy, her smile reaching her eyes. But starting around 6 or 7 months ago, something changed. Her smiles became more forced, her eyes more guarded. In several photos, I could see Marcus's hand on her shoulder or around her waist, and Sarah's body language was tense rather than relaxed. There was one photo in particular that I stared at for a long time. It was from Sarah's birthday dinner 2 months ago, taken at a nice restaurant in Bandon. Sarah sat next to Marcus at a candlelit table, wearing a green dress I had helped her pick out. Marcus had his arm around her and was smiling at the camera. Sarah was smiling too, but when I zoomed in on the photo, I could see fingerprint-shaped bruises on her upper arm. Barely visible but definitely there. Marcus's grip on her arm was clearly too tight, his fingers pressing into her flesh hard enough to leave marks. I had been at that dinner. I had sat across from them at that table. And I had not noticed the bruises or the too tight grip or the tension in Sarah's smile. I had been so focused on celebrating her birthday and enjoying the meal that I had missed what was happening right in front of me. Guilt crashed over me again, but I forced myself to push it aside. Self-recrimination would not help Sarah now. What would help was using these photos as evidence, showing the pattern of abuse that Marcus had worked so hard to hide. I sent the photos to Deputy Chun with detailed captions explaining when and where they were taken. Then I started making the list he had requested, writing down the names of everyone who knew Sarah well. Her best friend Jennifer from high school, her coworker Amanda from the veterinary clinic where she worked as a receptionist, our cousin Michelle who lived in Seattle, the volunteer coordinator at the animal shelter. Each of these people might have information or observations that could help build the case against Marcus. A nurse came in to check on Sarah, and I realized I had been sitting in that chair for over 12 hours. My back ached, my eyes felt gritty with exhaustion, and I desperately needed a shower and a change of clothes. But the thought of leaving Sarah alone, even for a few hours, felt impossible. The nurse must have seen the conflict on my face because she smiled kindly and said, "She is going to be in the same condition whether you are here or not for the next day or two. The best thing you can do for her is take care of yourself. Go get some rest, eat a real meal, clean up. Then come back and be here for her when she really needs you, which will be when she wakes up." I knew she was right, but it still took me another hour to actually force myself to leave the room. I kissed Sarah's forehead, careful to avoid the bandages and tubes, and promised her I would be back soon. Then I walked out of the ICU and into the harsh fluorescent lighting of the hospital corridor, feeling like I was leaving part of myself behind in that room. The drive to Rachel's house in Eugene felt surreal, like I was moving through a dream or watching someone else's life unfold. I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see Marcus somehow following me despite being in jail. The rational part of my brain knew he could not hurt me, but fear was not rational. Fear was the memory of Sarah's broken body, and her whispered warning that I was next. Rachel met me at her door and pulled me into a fierce hug without saying anything. She had always known when I needed silence more than words. She led me to her guest room, which she had already prepared with fresh sheets and towels. She had even set out some of her clothes for me to borrow since I had not brought any of my own. Shower, sleep, eat. In whatever order makes sense to you, she said. I will be here when you wake up, and we will figure out what to do next. I did all three in the order she suggested, standing under the hot water until it ran cold, falling into bed and sleeping dreamlessly for 6 hours, then waking to the smell of Rachel's homemade vegetable soup. We sat at her kitchen table, and I told her everything that had happened. She listened without interrupting, her expression moving from shock to anger to determination. What do you need from me? She asked when I finished. I do not know yet, but I think I am going to need a lot of help. This is going to be a long fight, and I cannot do it alone. You are not alone. Whatever you need, whenever you need it, I am here. That simple promise, offered without hesitation or conditions, gave me strength I did not know I needed. Rachel was right. I was not alone in this fight. Sarah was not alone. We had people who loved us and who would stand beside us no matter how difficult things became. I thought about Marcus sitting in a jail cell, probably still believing he would get away with what he had done. He had power and connections and a carefully constructed reputation as a good man. But he had underestimated the power of the people who loved Sarah. He had underestimated me. That was a mistake he was going to regret. 3 days after finding Sarah in that ditch, I sat in Rachel's living room surrounded by printouts of news articles, social media posts, and copies of police reports that Deputy Chan had shared with me. The story had exploded across the small coastal community where Sarah and Marcus lived, and the reaction was not at all what I had expected or hoped for. The local newspaper, the Bayshore Chronicle, had run the story on the front page with the headline "Local Contractor Arrested in Domestic Incident." The article was maddeningly neutral, presenting Marcus's version of events alongside the bare facts of Sarah's injuries without any indication of which account was more credible. They described Marcus as a well-respected member of the community and a dedicated volunteer, before even mentioning that my sister was fighting for her life in the intensive care unit. The comments section beneath the online version of the article made me physically ill. Dozens of people rushed to Marcus's defense, insisting that there must be some mistake, that Marcus would never hurt anyone, that Sarah must have been the aggressor or that her fall was truly accidental. Several commenters suggested that I was lying about what Sarah had told me, either because I was jealous of her happy marriage, or because I wanted attention. One person even claimed that Sarah had always been dramatic and unstable, and that Marcus was the real victim in this situation. I had never met most of these people, yet they felt entitled to judge my sister and dismiss her trauma based on nothing more than their superficial impression of Marcus as a nice guy who coached youth soccer and sponsored charity events. The disconnect between the Marcus they thought they knew and the Marcus who had beaten his pregnant wife and pushed her off a cliff was too large for them to reconcile, so instead they chose to doubt Sarah and attack me. Rachel found me reading these comments with tears streaming down my face and physically removed the laptop from my hands. You need to stop looking at that garbage. Those people do not matter. What matters is the evidence, the truth, and making sure Marcus faces justice for what he did. The headlights cut through the November fog like knives through smoke, illuminating the winding country road that connected my apartment in Eugene to the small coastal town where my sister lived. I had made this drive 100 times, usually looking forward to weekend visits filled with her famous blackberry cobbler and long walks along the beach. This time dread sat in my chest like a stone. Sarah had called me 3 hours earlier, her voice strange and distant, saying she needed to talk about something important but refusing to elaborate over the phone. Then she stopped answering her phone entirely. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I told myself I was overreacting as I navigated the curves of Highway 126, my knuckles white against the steering wheel. Sarah was probably fine. Maybe her phone died. Maybe she fell asleep waiting for me. Maybe the important thing she wanted to discuss was something simple, like marriage trouble she felt embarrassed to mention over the phone. But the fear that had seized me when her calls went straight to voicemail would not release its grip. The fog grew thicker as I approached the coast, reducing visibility to perhaps 50 feet. I slowed down, leaning forward as if those few inches would help me see better through the wall of gray. The road here ran parallel to steep embankments on one side, dropping down to rocky creek beds that filled with rushing water during winter storms. In summer, these ditches were mostly dry, filled with tall grass and blackberry brambles. That was when I saw it. A dark shape in the ditch that did not belong. At first, I thought it might be a deer that had been struck by a car, but something about the form made my heart stutter. I slammed on my brakes, the car skidding slightly on the damp pavement before stopping. I threw the transmission into park and grabbed my phone, turning on the flashlight as I stumbled out of the car. The beam of light swept across the embankment, and that was when I saw her. My sister Sarah, lying motionless in the ditch 15 feet below the road. Her body twisted at an angle that made my stomach lurch. I screamed her name, my voice cracking with terror as I half ran, half slid down the muddy slope toward her. She was wearing the blue cardigan I had given her for her birthday, now torn and covered in mud. Her face was barely recognizable, swollen and bruised, with blood matting her blonde hair to her scalp. But her chest was moving. She was breathing. I dropped to my knees beside her, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone steady. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glassy with pain. Her lips moved, forming words I had to lean close to hear. Her voice was barely a whisper, wet and labored, each word clearly causing agony. It was my husband. For words that shattered my world and set everything that followed into motion. For words that transformed me from an elementary school teacher, living a quiet life, into someone who would spend the next year fighting for justice with a ferocity I did not know I possessed. For words that revealed the truth my sister had been hiding behind cheerful phone calls and carefully angled photographs that never showed both her and Marcus in the same frame. My brother-in-law had tried to kill her, and somehow, impossibly, she had survived. The emergency responders arrived within 12 minutes of my 911 call, though it felt like hours. I knelt beside Sarah in that muddy ditch, afraid to move her but terrified that not moving her might be worse. My hands hovered uselessly over her broken body as I tried to remember anything from the first aid training I had taken years ago as part of my teaching certification. Keep her warm. Do not move her if there is spinal injury. Apply pressure to bleeding wounds. The instructions swirled in my head, but none of them seemed adequate for the catastrophe in front of me. Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness during those 12 minutes. Each time her eyes opened, they searched for something, finally settling on my face with recognition that brought fresh tears streaming down my cheeks. I kept talking to her, saying anything that came into my head. I told her the paramedics were coming. I told her she was going to be okay. I told her I loved her. I told her to stay with me, to keep breathing, to hold on just a little longer. The third time she regained consciousness, she grabbed my hand with surprising strength. Her fingers dug into my palm as she pulled me closer, her breath coming in painful gasps that suggested broken ribs or worse. He pushed me, she whispered, each word costing her something. Off the cliff. Behind the house. I crawled. All the way here. Had to warn you. Ice flooded my veins. Warn me about what? He knows. That I was going to tell. He said you are next if anyone finds out. Her grip on my hand tightened even more. Do not go to my house. Promise me. Before I could respond, the flashing lights of the ambulance appeared through the fog, followed seconds later by a sheriff's department vehicle. The paramedics moved with practiced efficiency, their hands gentle but swift as they assessed Sarah's injuries and prepared to move her. I heard fragments of their conversation, medical terminology I did not understand, but that sounded serious. Possible internal bleeding, definite concussion, multiple fractures, severe hypothermia. A young deputy with a serious face approached me as the paramedics worked. His name tag read Chun, and his dark eyes were sharp despite the late hour. He held a small notebook and a pen, the tools of his profession as essential as my sister's injuries were catastrophic. Ma'am, can you tell me what happened here? His voice was professionally neutral, giving nothing away. I opened my mouth to repeat what Sarah had told me, but something made me hesitate. My brother-in-law Marcus Hendricks was a well-respected contractor in this small coastal community. He had lived here his entire life, had gone to high school with half the people in town, including probably this deputy. He served on the city council. He coached youth soccer. Everyone loved Marcus. And he had just tried to murder my sister. Would this deputy believe me if I accused Marcus? Or would he think Sarah's injuries were from an accident, Her accusations the product of head trauma and confusion? I made a split-second decision to be vague, to wait until I understood the situation better. I found her like this. She called me a few hours ago and asked me to come visit, but then she stopped answering her phone. When I got to this part of the road, I saw her in the ditch. All of this was true, just incomplete. Did she say what happened? She was barely conscious. I could not understand most of what she said. This was a lie, but I told myself it was a protective one. I needed time to think, to figure out the right way to handle this. Deputy Chan made notes in his book, then looked back at me with an expression that suggested he knew I was holding something back but was not going to push for now. Do you know if your sister has any medical conditions? Anything the paramedics should know about? I shook my head, then remembered. She is allergic to sulfa drugs. And she is 3 months pregnant. But what if they are right? I heard myself say, even though I knew it was ridiculous. What if the jury believes Marcus instead of Sarah? What if his reputation protects him and Sarah does not get justice? Then we make sure the jury sees the truth. We find every piece of evidence, every witness, every document that shows what Marcus really is. We do not let public opinion determine the outcome. We let facts determine the outcome. Rachel's confidence steadied me, but I could not shake the fear that Marcus's standing in the community would ultimately protect him from consequences. I had already received 3 phone calls from people I did not know, all of them asking me to reconsider my accusations against Marcus, all of them suggesting that I was tearing apart a grieving husband who had lost his child and nearly lost his wife in a tragic accident. The fact that these strangers had somehow obtained my phone number was disturbing enough, but their willingness to pressure me on Marcus's behalf revealed just how extensive his support network was. Deputy Chan had warned me this would happen. He had explained that in small communities, people often rallied around accused abusers who had carefully cultivated positive reputations, while victims were subjected to intense scrutiny and skepticism. He had told me to document every contact from Marcus's supporters, to save every threatening or harassing message, and to report anything that crossed the line into witness intimidation. I had already filled half a notebook with names, phone numbers, and summaries of conversations that ranged from merely uncomfortable to overtly threatening. The hospital called around noon to tell me that Sarah's condition had improved enough that they were beginning to reduce her sedation. Dr. Patel cautioned that waking from a medically induced coma was a gradual process, and that Sarah might not be fully conscious for several more days. He also warned me that when she did wake, she might be confused, disoriented, or unable to remember what had happened to her. Brain injuries were unpredictable, and there was no way to know what cognitive or physical effects Sarah might experience until she regained consciousness. I drove back to Coos Bay immediately, Rachel insisting on coming with me despite having to take time off from her job as a physical therapist. We arrived at the hospital to find a uniformed officer stationed outside Sarah's room, which Deputy Chan had arranged after learning about the phone calls I had been receiving. The officer checked our identification before allowing us to enter, a precaution that felt both reassuring and terrifying. If the police thought Sarah needed protection even while Marcus was in jail, what did that say about the danger we still faced? Sarah looked marginally better than she had 3 days earlier. The swelling in her face had decreased slightly, and some of the bruising had begun to fade from purple-black to greenish-yellow. The ventilator had been removed, replaced by a simple oxygen cannula in her nose. Her breathing was her own now, steady and unlabored. But she remained unconscious, her eyes closed and her body still beneath the thin hospital blanket. I pulled my chair close to her bedside and took her hand, careful as always to avoid the various tubes and monitors. Rachel settled into the other chair with a book, giving me space to be with my sister while still providing silent support. We sat like that for hours watching Sarah breathe, waiting for any sign that she was returning to us. Around 4 in the afternoon, Sarah's fingers twitched in my hand. I sat up straighter, hardly daring to breathe. Her eyelids fluttered, and a small sound escaped her throat, something between a moan and a sigh. I squeezed her hand gently and leaned closer. "Sarah? Can you hear me? It is Emma. You are safe. You are in the hospital and you are going to be okay." Her eyes opened, unfocused and glassy. They wandered around the room without seeming to register anything, then finally settled on my face. For a long moment, she just stared at me as if trying to remember who I was or where she was. Then recognition flickered in her expression, followed immediately by fear so intense that the heart monitor began beeping faster. "Marcus," she whispered, her voice hoarse and damaged from the ventilator tube that had recently been removed. "Where is Marcus? He is not here. He cannot hurt you. He is in jail, Sarah. He was arrested the night I found you. You are safe." She tried to sit up, but pain stopped her immediately. She collapsed back against the pillows with a gasp, her free hand moving to her ribs. I pressed the call button for the nurse while trying to calm Sarah, who had begun to hyperventilate despite the oxygen. "You need to stay still. You have broken ribs and a skull fracture and a lot of other injuries. The doctors need to check you now that you are awake, but you are safe. I promise you are safe." The nurse arrived within seconds, followed quickly by Dr. Patel. They performed a series of neurological tests, while I stepped back to give them room to work. They asked Sarah to follow a light with her eyes, to squeeze their hands, to tell them her name and the date and where she was. She answered most questions correctly, though she seemed confused about how much time had passed and why she was in the hospital. "Do you remember what happened to you?" Dr. Patel asked gently. Sarah's eyes found mine across the room, and I saw the memories returning like a wave crashing over her. Tears began streaming down her face as her breathing became ragged again. "He tried to kill me. Marcus tried to kill me. I told him I was going to leave, that I was going to tell Emma everything, and he hit me with the wine bottle. Then he pushed me. I fell so far. I thought I was going to die." Dr. Patel and the nurse exchanged glances, then Dr. Patel made a note on his tablet. "I need to inform the police that you are awake and able to give a statement. But first we need to make sure you are stable. Can you tell me where you are experiencing pain?" Sarah listed her injuries, and Dr. Patel ordered additional pain medication. He spent another 20 minutes examining her, checking her reflexes and cognitive function, asking questions designed to assess whether her brain was functioning normally despite the trauma it had sustained. Finally, he seemed satisfied that she was as stable as could be expected. "Your recovery is going to take time," he told Sarah. "You sustained serious injuries, and while I am encouraged by your neurological function at this point, you will need extensive physical therapy and monitoring. You are going to be in the hospital for at least another week, possibly longer. But I am cautiously optimistic that you will make a full recovery eventually." After the medical team left, I returned to Sarah's bedside. Rachel had quietly slipped out during the examination, giving us privacy. Sarah was crying silently, tears running into her hair and soaking the pillow beneath her head. "The baby," she whispered. "They told me. The baby is gone." I did not know what to say. I took her hand again and held it while she grieved for the child she would never meet, the future that had been stolen from her along with so much else. We sat like that until Deputy Chun arrived an hour later, carrying a recording device and wearing an expression of professional sympathy. "Sarah, I am Deputy Chun. I am investigating what happened to you. I know this is difficult, but I need you to tell me everything you remember about the night you were injured. Take your time, and if you need to stop, we can stop. But the more details you can give me, the stronger the case will be against your husband." Sarah took a shaky breath and began to tell her story. Her voice was weak and she had to stop frequently to rest, but the account she gave was clear, detailed, and absolutely damning. She and Marcus had been arguing for weeks about her pregnancy. He had been pressuring her to terminate it, claiming they were not financially ready for a child, that it would ruin their lifestyle, that she would be a terrible mother. When she refused, he became increasingly controlling and aggressive. He monitored her phone calls and text messages. He forbade her from seeing friends without his permission. He criticized everything she did, from how she dressed to how she spoke to how she spent her time. The psychological abuse had been constant and exhausting. 2 weeks before the attack, Sarah had discovered text messages on Marcus's phone that revealed he was having an affair with a woman who worked at one of his construction sites. When she confronted him, he had slapped her across the face, the first time he had been physically violent with her. He had apologized afterward, claimed he was stressed about money and the pregnancy, promised it would never happen again. Sarah had believed him because she wanted to believe him, because acknowledging the truth would mean acknowledging that her marriage was built on lies. But the abuse had not stopped. 3 days before the attack, Marcus had shoved her into a wall hard enough to leave bruises on her shoulders and back. The next day, he had grabbed her by the throat during an argument about her refusal to have an abortion. Each incident of violence was followed by apologies and promises that Sarah desperately wanted to trust but no longer could. On the night of the attack, Sarah had finally decided she had to leave. She had called me and asked me to come to the coast because she needed help getting out. She was afraid of what Marcus would do if she tried to leave on her own, afraid he would hurt her or prevent her from going. She planned to pack a bag while I was driving there, then leave with me that night and figure out the rest later. But Marcus had overheard part of her phone call with me. He had confronted her, demanding to know what she was planning to tell me. When she refused to answer, he had become enraged. He had grabbed a wine bottle from the outdoor table and struck her on the back of the head, and when she fell to the ground, he had dragged her to the edge of the cliff and pushed her over. He told me no one would believe me even if I survived, Sarah said, her voice breaking. He said everyone in town loved him, and that I was just the unstable wife who could not handle being pregnant. He said if I tried to tell anyone what he had done, he would make sure I lost everything. Then he pushed me and I was falling and I thought that was it. I thought I was dead. Deputy Chin's expression had grown harder and angrier as Sarah spoke, though his voice remained gentle. How did you survive the fall? I landed in blackberry bushes about 20 feet down. They broke my fall enough that I did not die, but I was tangled in them and hurt so badly I could barely move. I could hear Marcus at the top of the cliff, calling down to me, asking if I was dead. I did not make any sound because I was afraid he would come down and finish what he started. After a few minutes, he went back to the house. So he left you there, thinking you were dead, and made no attempt to call for help. He thought he had killed me. He thought the fall would do it or the cold or the injuries. He did not count on me being able to crawl out of there. Sarah's eyes found mine. I crawled for hours. I do not even know how long. Everything hurt so much, and I kept losing consciousness, but I knew I had to get to the road. I knew Emma would be coming, and I had to warn her. I had to make sure she did not go to the house, because Marcus said he would kill her too if she got involved. The recording captured everything. Sarah's testimony delivered in a weak but steady voice, interrupted only by tears and pain but never wavering in its essential truth. When she finished, Deputy Chan turned off the device and sat back in his chair. Sarah, what you have just told me is going to be crucial evidence in the prosecution of your husband. His defense attorney will try to discredit your testimony, will claim your injuries affected your memory, or that you are lying for some reason. But the physical evidence supports everything you have said. The location where we found you, the trail you left, the injuries you sustained, the wine bottle with your blood on it, all of it corroborates your account. What happens now? Sarah asked. Marcus has already been charged with attempted murder, first-degree assault, and unlawful termination of pregnancy. Based on what you have just told me, the district attorney may add additional charges related to the ongoing abuse. His arraignment is scheduled for tomorrow morning. The judge will determine whether he can post bail or whether he remains in custody until trial. He has to stay in jail, Sarah said, fear creeping into her voice. If he gets out, he will come after me. He will finish what he started. The prosecution will argue for no bail based on the severity of the charges and the danger you face. Given the evidence and your testimony, I believe the judge will deny bail. But I cannot guarantee it, which is why we have an officer stationed outside your room, and why I need both you and Emma to be extremely careful about your safety. After Deputy Chun left, Sarah and I sat together in the gathering darkness of her hospital room. The sun had set while she was giving her statement, and the only light now came from the monitors and the hallway visible through the partially open door. Sarah seemed smaller somehow, diminished by everything she had been through and everything she had just relived by speaking it aloud. I am sorry, she whispered. I am sorry I did not tell you sooner. I am sorry I let it get this bad. I'm sorry you had to find me like that. You have nothing to apologize for. Marcus did this to you. Marcus is the one who should be sorry, and Marcus is the one who is going to pay for what he did. What if they do not believe me? What if his lawyer convinces the jury that I am lying or confused? He has so many friends in town, Emma. So many people who think he is a great guy. What if that matters more than the truth? I had been asking myself the same questions, had been terrified of the same possibilities. But sitting there with my sister, seeing the fear in her eyes and the injuries Marcus had inflicted on her body, I felt something crystallize inside me. A determination that went beyond fear or doubt, or the opinions of people who had chosen to defend a monster rather than believe his victim. Then we make them see the truth. We find every piece of evidence, every witness, every document that shows what Marcus really is behind the mask he wears for the public. We build a case so strong that no jury can ignore it. And we do not give up, no matter how hard it gets or how many of his friends try to protect him. Sarah squeezed my hand weakly. I do not know if I am strong enough for this fight. You are strong enough. You survived being beaten and pushed off a cliff. You crawled for hours with catastrophic injuries to try to warn me and get help. You are the strongest person I know, Sarah. And you are not fighting alone. I am going to be with you every step of the way. Promise me something, she said, her eyes heavy with exhaustion and pain medication. Promise me that if something happens to me, if I do not make it or if Marcus finds a way to get to me, promise you will not let him get away with this. Promise you will make sure people know the truth about what he did. Nothing is going to happen to you. But yes, I promise. Marcus is not going to get away with anything. Not if I have anything to say about it. Sarah's eyes closed, and within minutes she was asleep, her breathing deep and even. I stayed with her until visiting hours ended, then kissed her forehead and left her in the care of the nurses and the officer outside her door. As I walked through the hospital corridors toward the exit, I felt the weight of the promise I had made settling over me like armor. The fight ahead would be difficult. Marcus had resources, connections, and a community that wanted to believe in his innocence. But Sarah had the truth, and she had me. And she had evidence that could not be explained away by even the most skilled defense attorney. The path to justice would be long and painful, but we were going to walk it together. In the parking lot, I called Deputy Chan and asked him to arrange a meeting with the district attorney handling Marcus's case. If we were going to build the strongest possible case against my brother-in-law, I needed to understand exactly what evidence we had, what evidence we still needed, and how I could help gather it. This was not just about Sarah anymore. This was about every woman who had been abused by a man the community loved, every victim who had been silenced by an abuser's reputation, every person who had been told their trauma mattered less than maintaining someone else's image. Marcus had tried to destroy my sister and very nearly succeeded. Now I was going to spend every ounce of energy I possessed making sure he faced the full consequences of his actions. He had underestimated Sarah's strength and her will to survive. And he had badly underestimated what her sister would do to protect her and fight for her. That was a mistake that would cost him everything he had worked so hard to build. His reputation, his freedom, and his future were all about to crumble under the weight of the truth he had tried so hard to bury. And I was going to be there to make sure every piece of evidence, every testimony, and every consequence came crashing down on him exactly the way he deserved. The district attorney's office occupied the third floor of the Coos County Courthouse, a building that managed to look both imposing and tired at the same time. The gray stone exterior spoke of authority and permanence, while the worn carpeting and flickering fluorescent lights inside revealed the reality of limited budgets and deferred maintenance. I sat in a small conference room with Deputy Chan, waiting for the prosecutor who would be handling Marcus's case to arrive. Rachel had wanted to come with me, but I had asked her to stay at the hospital with Sarah instead. Having someone my sister trusted nearby, while I dealt with the legal machinery, felt important. The door opened and a woman in her late 40s entered, carrying an overstuffed accordion file and a laptop computer. She had short dark hair streaked with gray, sharp brown eyes behind rectangular glasses, and the exhausted expression of someone who had been fighting uphill battles for most of her career. She set down her materials and extended her hand across the table. Emma Reeves, I am District Attorney Patricia Vance. I am sorry we are meeting under these circumstances, but I want you to know that we are taking your sister's case very seriously. What happened to Sarah is unconscionable, and I intend to prosecute Marcus Hendricks to the fullest extent of the law. Her directness was both reassuring and slightly overwhelming. I shook her hand and sat back down as she settled into her chair and opened the accordion file, revealing neatly organized sections of documents, photographs, and evidence logs. I have reviewed the police reports, the medical records, the physical evidence from the scene, and the recording of your sister's statement from yesterday. I have also reviewed your statement from the night you found Sarah and the documentation you sent to Deputy Chan. What we have here is a strong case for attempted murder, but I need to be transparent with you about the challenges we face. She pulled out several photographs and laid them on the table between us. They showed the cliff edge behind Sarah and Marcus's house, the blood on the rocks below, the smashed phone on the patio, and the wine bottle that had been used as a weapon. Each image was a piece of the puzzle that told the story of what Marcus had done, but seeing them arranged like evidence in a trial made everything feel more real and more terrifying. The physical evidence is compelling. We have your sister's blood at the scene, we have the weapon with her blood and hair on it, we have the trail she left when she crawled to the road, and we have the location where you found her. All of this corroborates her account of being attacked and pushed off the cliff. The medical evidence also supports her version of events. The pattern of her injuries is consistent with being struck from behind, and then falling a significant distance onto rocks and vegetation. Patricia paused and looked at me directly. However, the defense will argue that this evidence is open to interpretation. They will claim that Sarah and Marcus were drinking together, that an argument escalated, that Sarah ran toward the cliff in an emotional state, and that Marcus tried to stop her but she slipped and fell. They will suggest that the wine bottle injury came from Sarah striking her head during the fall rather than being hit by Marcus. They will claim that Sarah's testimony is unreliable due to her head injury, and that her accusations are the result of confusion or even malice. But that makes no sense, I said, frustration rising in my voice. Sarah does not drink, especially not while pregnant. The pattern of her injuries shows she was hit from behind before she fell. And she crawled for hours to get help, which is not the behavior of someone who fell accidentally. I agree completely, and those are exactly the arguments we will make. But you need to understand how defense attorneys work in cases like this. Marcus Hendricks has hired Trevor Caldwell, one of the most expensive and aggressive criminal defense attorneys in the state. Caldwell specializes in representing wealthy defendants accused of violent crimes, and his strategy is always the same. He attacks the victim's credibility, creates alternative explanations for the evidence, and plays on any sympathy the jury might have for his client. Deputy Chun leaned forward. Caldwell has already started laying the groundwork in the media. He gave an interview to the Bayshore Chronicle yesterday claiming that Marcus is devastated by the loss of his child and terrified for his wife's recovery. He characterized the charges as a rush to judgment based on statements made by a severely injured woman who was not in her right mind. The thought of Marcus's attorney portraying him as the victim while Sarah lay in a hospital bed, recovering from injuries he inflicted, made me want to scream. But Patricia held up a hand before I could speak. I know this is infuriating. I know it feels like the system is designed to protect abusers while putting victims on trial. And unfortunately, there is some truth to that. But we are not going to let Caldwell control the narrative. We are going to build a case so thorough and so well documented that the jury has no choice but to see through his manipulation. She pulled out a legal pad and began making notes. Here is what we need to establish beyond any reasonable doubt. First, that Marcus had a history of abusing Sarah prior to the night of the attack. Second, that he had motive to harm her. Third, that the physical evidence proves his guilt rather than supporting his accident theory. And fourth, that Sarah's testimony is credible and reliable despite the defense's attempts to undermine it. How do we do that? I asked. We start with the history of abuse. Deputy Chun mentioned that Sarah told him about escalating violence in the weeks before the attack. We need to document every instance she can remember. We also need to find any physical evidence that corroborates those incidents. Medical records showing previous injuries, photographs that might show bruises or marks, text messages or emails where she mentioned being hurt or afraid. Anything that establishes a pattern. I thought about the photographs I had found on my phone, the one showing Sarah with forced smiles and visible tension in her body language. I have photos from various visits over the past year. In some of them, you can see bruises on her arms or signs that she was uncomfortable around Marcus. I already sent them to Deputy Chun, but I can print out high-resolution versions if that would help. Absolutely. We will need to establish a timeline of when those photos were taken and what Sarah's explanation was at the time for any visible injuries. If she told you she bumped into something or had an accident, And it later turned out those injuries came from Marcus. That shows a pattern of her covering for him, which is typical behavior for domestic violence victims. Patricia made more notes. We also need to talk to anyone who might have witnessed signs of abuse or concerning behavior from Marcus. Friends, family members, coworkers, neighbors. Someone must have seen or heard something that raised red flags. Deputy Chun, what have the interviews revealed so far? Deputy Chun consulted his own notebook. We have spoken with approximately 15 people who knew the couple. The responses have been mixed. Several people, mostly Marcus's friends and business associates, claim they never saw any signs of problems in the marriage. They describe Marcus as a devoted husband and express disbelief at the charges. However, we have also found 3 witnesses who reported concerning observations. He flipped to a marked page. Sarah's coworker at the veterinary clinic, Amanda Torres, stated that Sarah had been increasingly withdrawn over the past 6 months. She noticed bruises on Sarah's arms on at least 2 occasions, and when she asked about them, Sarah gave explanations that seemed rehearsed or evasive. Torres also stated that Marcus began calling the clinic multiple times per day starting about 4 months ago, always wanting to know where Sarah was and when she would be home. That demonstrates controlling behavior, Patricia said, making a note. What else? A neighbor, Helen Garrett, who lives 2 houses down from the Hendricks property, reported hearing loud arguments coming from their house on multiple occasions over the past year. She specifically remembered one incident about 2 months ago where she heard Sarah crying and Marcus yelling, followed by the sound of something breaking. She considered calling the police but decided against it because she did not want to interfere in a domestic dispute. The casual way people dismissed obvious warning signs as none of their business made my blood boil. Sarah had been suffering, and people had noticed but chosen not to act. How many women were being abused right now while neighbors and coworkers decided it was not their place to get involved? The 3rd witness is Dr. Elizabeth Kim, Sarah's obstetrician. Sarah had an appointment 3 weeks before the attack, and Dr. Kim noted in her records that Sarah appeared anxious and had visible bruising on her upper arms. When Dr. Kim asked about the bruises, Sarah claimed she had fallen while hiking. Dr. Kim documented her concerns about possible domestic violence and gave Sarah information about local resources for abuse victims. Sarah assured her everything was fine at home. Patricia looked up from her notes. Did Dr. Kim file a report with any authorities? No. She documented her concerns in the medical file and provided resources, but without Sarah confirming abuse or requesting help, there was nothing more she felt she could do legally. That documentation is still valuable. It shows that a medical professional observed signs of abuse and took appropriate action to assess and address it. The fact that Sarah denied the abuse at that time is consistent with how victims typically behave when they are not yet ready to leave or ask for help. Patricia turned to me. Emma, I need you to think carefully about your own observations of Sarah's relationship with Marcus. Were there any conversations where she expressed concerns about her marriage? Any times when she seemed afraid of Marcus or changed her behavior around him? Any instances where Marcus was controlling, jealous, or aggressive in your presence? I closed my eyes and forced myself to review every interaction I could remember, looking past the surface cheerfulness to the undercurrents I had missed or dismissed at the time. There had been signs, small things that had not seemed significant in isolation but that formed a pattern when viewed together. Sarah started canceling plans with me more frequently over the past year. She always had reasons that seemed legitimate, but now I realize Marcus was probably preventing her from seeing me. When we did get together, she was always checking her phone, responding immediately to any texts or calls from Marcus. If he called while we were out, she would tense up and her whole demeanor would change. I opened my eyes and looked at Patricia. There was one visit about 6 months ago when Marcus came home earlier than expected while Sarah and I were having lunch at their house. Sarah seemed nervous as soon as she heard his car in the driveway. When he came in, she immediately started apologizing for not having dinner prepared yet, even though it was only 2 in the afternoon. He did not say anything overtly threatening, but there was something in the way he looked at her that made me uncomfortable. What did he say or do specifically? He asked what we had been talking about. Sarah said we were just catching up, but he kept pressing, asking if she had mentioned anything about their finances or their relationship. She kept reassuring him that we had just been chatting about nothing important. He accepted that eventually, but the whole interaction felt off. Like she was trying to placate him or prevent him from getting angry. Patricia made detailed notes about this incident. That type of interrogation about innocent activities is classic controlling behavior. It shows he was monitoring who she talked to and what she said, which supports the prosecution's theory that he attacked her because she was planning to tell you the truth about their relationship. She pulled out another set of documents. Now let us talk about motive. According to Sarah's statement, Marcus was having an affair and wanted her to terminate the pregnancy. We need to establish both of those facts independently of Sarah's testimony. Deputy Chun, what have you found regarding the alleged affair? We subpoenaed Marcus's phone records and are in the process of analyzing them. We have identified a number that appears frequently in his call and text logs starting about 3 months ago. The number belongs to a woman named Vanessa Clark, who works as a project coordinator for one of Marcus's construction projects. We are planning to interview her this week. If she confirms the affair, that establishes motive. A man having an affair whose wife is pregnant might see murder as a way to eliminate both his unwanted domestic responsibility and the witness to his infidelity. As for the pregnancy itself, do we have any evidence that Marcus was pressuring Sarah to terminate it? Deputy Chun shook his head. Nothing beyond Sarah's statement at this point. We are checking her medical records to see if she discussed this with her obstetrician. But so far we have not found corroborating documentation. Keep looking. Talk to anyone Sarah confided in. Check her emails and text messages if we can recover them from her damaged phone. The motive piece is crucial because it helps the jury understand why Marcus would do something this extreme. Patricia moved on to the next section of her notes. Now let us discuss the physical evidence and how we counter the defense's alternative explanation. We need expert witnesses who can testify about the injury patterns, the blood evidence, the mechanics of the fall, and the timeline of events. The defense will bring their own experts who will try to suggest that Sarah's injuries are consistent with an accidental fall. We need our experts to be more credible and more persuasive. She looked at Deputy Chun. Have we engaged a forensic pathologist and a biomechanics expert? We have Dr. Richard Morse from Oregon Health and Science University lined up as our forensic pathologist. He has reviewed Sarah's medical records and the crime scene photos. His preliminary opinion is that the injury to Sarah's head from the wine bottle shows a distinct strike pattern rather than an impact from falling. He is prepared to testify that someone hit her with the bottle before she went over the cliff. Excellent. What about the biomechanics analysis? We are still working on that. We need someone who can testify about the trajectory of Sarah's fall and explain why the pattern of her injuries is inconsistent with accidentally slipping over the edge. That type of expert is expensive, and we are working within budget constraints. Patricia's expression tightened with frustration. I will talk to my supervisor about allocating additional funds. This case is going to trial and we need every resource available. The defense will spare no expense in defending Marcus, and we cannot afford to be outgunned by their expert witnesses. She turned back to me. Finally, we need to address Sarah's credibility. The defense will argue that her head injury makes her testimony unreliable. We need medical experts who can testify that despite her injuries, her memory and cognitive function are intact. We also need to establish that her account has been consistent from the moment you found her to her formal statement to police to any future testimony she gives. Any inconsistencies will be exploited by the defense. Sarah has been completely consistent, I said. From the first moment she regained consciousness in that ditch, she told me Marcus pushed her. She has never wavered from that account. Good. We will establish that consistency through your testimony, the paramedics who treated her at the scene, the medical staff who cared for her in the hospital, and Deputy Chun who took her formal statement. The more witnesses who can confirm she has told the same story from the beginning, the harder it will be for the defense to claim she is confused or lying. Patricia gathered her papers and looked at both Deputy Chun and me with an expression that conveyed both determination and the weight of responsibility she carried. I want to be clear about something. This case is going to be difficult. Marcus Hendricks has resources and community support that most defendants do not have. His attorney is going to use every trick available to create doubt and confusion. The trial will be emotionally brutal, particularly for Sarah, who will have to testify about the most traumatic experience of her life, while her abuser sits across the courtroom from her. She paused, making sure I was fully absorbing what she was saying. But we have something they do not have. We have the truth. We have a survivor who lived through an attempted murder and is brave enough to tell her story. We have physical evidence that supports her account. And we have witnesses who saw the warning signs of abuse. If we do our jobs correctly, if we prepare thoroughly and present our case effectively, I believe we can convince a jury to hold Marcus Hendricks accountable for what he did. What do you need from me? I asked. Everything you can remember, everyone you can connect us with, and your presence throughout this process. Sarah is going to need your support as we move toward trial. You are going to be a key witness, testifying about what Sarah told you when you found her and about your observations of their relationship. You may also need to help Sarah prepare for the ordeal of testifying. This is going to consume your life for the foreseeable future. Are you prepared for that? I thought about my job at Cascade Elementary, the second graders who were probably wondering when their regular teacher would return. I thought about my apartment in Eugene, sitting empty while I spent my days between Rachel's house and the hospital. I thought about the life I had been living a week ago, peaceful and predictable and completely separate from the horror that had been unfolding in Sarah's marriage. That life was gone now, replaced by police reports and legal strategy, and the mission of ensuring justice for my sister. There was no question about whether I was prepared for it. I had no choice but to be prepared. Sarah had survived being pushed off a cliff and crawling for hours with catastrophic injuries, because she refused to let Marcus get away with what he had done. The least I could do was fight just as hard to make sure her survival meant something. I am ready to do whatever it takes, I said. Marcus tried to destroy my sister and he almost succeeded. I am not going to rest until he pays for what he did. Patricia nodded with something that might have been respect or recognition. Then let us get to work. We have a case to build and a trial to win. Over the following weeks, I became intimately familiar with the criminal justice system in ways I had never anticipated. I met with Patricia and her team multiple times, going over every detail of Sarah's life and marriage, identifying potential witnesses, reviewing evidence, and preparing for the legal battle ahead. Deputy Chun continued his investigation, tracking down leads and documenting everything that might be relevant to the case. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks after Marcus's arrest. This was the proceeding where a judge would determine whether there was sufficient evidence to hold Marcus for trial. Patricia explained that preliminary hearings were typically formalities in cases with strong evidence, but that Marcus's attorney might use it as an opportunity to test the prosecution's case and identify weaknesses to exploit later. Sarah was released from the hospital 2 weeks after regaining consciousness. Her physical injuries were healing, though she still had significant pain and limited mobility. The doctors were cautiously optimistic about her neurological recovery, though they warned that some effects of the traumatic brain injury might not become apparent until months or even years later. She moved into Rachel's guest room with me, the three of us forming an unlikely household united by the shared mission of supporting Sarah's recovery and pursuing justice. Living with Sarah during this period revealed the full extent of what Marcus had done to her. She had nightmares almost every night, waking up screaming and convinced that Marcus was in the room. She startled at sudden noises and unexpected movements. She checked the locks on doors and windows compulsively. She could not bear to be alone even for a few minutes. The trauma had not just affected her body, but had fundamentally altered how she experienced the world. But beneath the fear and pain, I also saw remarkable strength emerging. Sarah attended every meeting with Patricia and the prosecution team, providing detailed information about the abuse she had endured and the events of the night Marcus tried to kill her. She worked with a victim advocate who helped her understand the legal process and prepare for the emotional challenges of testifying. She started therapy with a counselor who specialized in trauma recovery. Each day, she did the difficult work of healing and preparing to face Marcus in court. The preliminary hearing arrived on a cold December morning. Sarah, Rachel, and I drove to the courthouse together, none of us speaking much during the 45-minute drive from Eugene to Coos Bay. The courthouse parking lot was already full when we arrived, and I recognized several news vans from Portland television stations. The case had attracted regional media attention, with coverage focusing on the dramatic elements of the story and the contrast between Marcus's public reputation and the charges he faced. Inside the courtroom, I saw Marcus for the first time since the night I found Sarah. He sat at the defense table wearing an expensive suit and an expression of dignified suffering that made me want to scream. His attorney Trevor Caldwell sat beside him, a silver-haired man in his 60s who exuded confidence and entitlement. Behind them in the gallery sat dozens of Marcus's supporters, people from the community who still believed in his innocence despite the evidence against him. On our side of the courtroom, the victim's side, we were far fewer in number. Sarah, Rachel, and I sat in the front row behind Patricia and her team. Deputy Chan sat nearby, along with a few other people I recognized as witnesses who had been interviewed during the investigation. The imbalance felt symbolic of the fight we faced. A small group armed with truth against a larger force committed to defending a lie. The judge entered and the proceedings began. Patricia presented evidence of the crime, including crime scene photographs, medical records documenting Sarah's injuries, and Deputy Chen's testimony about what I had told him the night I found Sarah, and what Sarah had said in her formal statement. Trevor Caldwell cross-examined aggressively, trying to establish inconsistencies or raise doubts about the evidence, but Patricia held her ground. The hearing lasted most of the day. I watched Sarah sitting motionless beside me, her hands clenched in her lap, her eyes fixed on Marcus as if she needed to see him restrained and powerless to believe he could not hurt her anymore. When the judge finally ruled that there was sufficient evidence to bind Marcus over for trial, and that he would remain in custody without bail, Sarah exhaled for what seemed like the first time in hours. Outside the courthouse, Patricia spoke briefly with reporters while keeping Sarah, Rachel, and me away from the cameras and microphones. She emphasized the strength of the evidence and the prosecution's commitment to seeking justice for Sarah. Trevor Caldwell gave his own statement, claiming the charges were based on the confused recollections of a seriously injured woman, and that the truth would emerge at trial. The competing narratives felt like a preview of the battle ahead. As we drove back to Eugene, Sarah finally spoke. I thought seeing him in handcuffs would make me feel safer, but I am still terrified. What if the jury believes his version instead of mine? What if I have to go through all of this and he still gets away with it? Then we fight harder, I said. We do everything possible to make sure the jury sees the truth. And we do not give up no matter what happens. Promise me something, Sarah said quietly. Promise me that if I cannot do this, if testifying becomes too much and I fall apart, promise you will not be angry with me. Promise you will understand. I reached over and took her hand. You are not going to fall apart. You are the strongest person I know. But even if you do struggle, even if this is harder than either of us can imagine, I will never be angry with you. You are the victim here, Sarah. Whatever you feel and however you cope is valid. My job is to support you, not judge you. Rachel glanced at us in the rearview mirror. You are both warriors. You are fighting a system that too often protects abusers and doubts victims. The fact that you are still fighting, still refusing to let Marcus control the narrative, is incredibly brave. Whatever happens at trial, you should both be proud of what you have already accomplished. Her words settled over us like a blessing and a challenge. The preliminary hearing was over, but the real battle had not yet begun. The trial was still months away, and those months would be filled with preparation, investigation, and the constant stress of knowing that everything depended on our ability to convince 12 strangers that Marcus Hendricks was a monster who had tried to murder his pregnant wife. But we had taken the first step. The judge had looked at the evidence and determined that Marcus should stand trial for what he had done. That decision validated Sarah's courage in speaking her truth, and my determination to fight for her. It proved that despite Marcus's resources and reputation, the truth still mattered in some fundamental way. As we pulled into Rachel's driveway as the sun was setting, I looked at my sister and saw not just the trauma she carried but also the resilience she embodied. She had survived the unsurvivable and found the strength to seek justice. Then let us get to work. We have a case to build and a trial to win. Over the following weeks, I became intimately familiar with the criminal justice system in ways I had never anticipated. I met with Patricia and her team multiple times, going over every detail of Sarah's life and marriage, identifying potential witnesses, reviewing evidence, and preparing for the legal battle ahead. Deputy Chun continued his investigation, tracking down leads and documenting everything that might be relevant to the case. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks after Marcus's arrest. This was the proceeding where a judge would determine whether there was sufficient evidence to hold Marcus for trial. Patricia explained that preliminary hearings were typically formalities in cases with strong evidence, but that Marcus's attorney might use it as an opportunity to test the prosecution's case and identify weaknesses to exploit later. Sarah was released from the hospital 2 weeks after regaining consciousness. Her physical injuries were healing, though she still had significant pain and limited mobility. The doctors were cautiously optimistic about her neurological recovery, though they warned that some effects of the traumatic brain injury might not become apparent until months or even years later. She moved into Rachel's guest room with me, the three of us forming an unlikely household united by the shared mission of supporting Sarah's recovery and pursuing justice. Living with Sarah during this period revealed the full extent of what Marcus had done to her. She had nightmares almost every night, waking up screaming and convinced that Marcus was in the room. She startled at sudden noises and unexpected movements. She checked the locks on doors and windows compulsively. She could not bear to be alone even for a few minutes. The trauma had not just affected her body, but had fundamentally altered how she experienced the world. But beneath the fear and pain, I also saw remarkable strength emerging. Sarah attended every meeting with Patricia and the prosecution team, providing detailed information about the abuse she had endured and the events of the night Marcus tried to kill her. She worked with a victim advocate who helped her understand the legal process and prepare for the emotional challenges of testifying. She started therapy with a counselor who specialized in trauma recovery. Each day, she did the difficult work of healing and preparing to face Marcus in court. The preliminary hearing arrived on a cold December morning. Sarah, Rachel, and I drove to the courthouse together, none of us speaking much during the 45-minute drive from Eugene to Coos Bay. The courthouse parking lot was already full when we arrived, and I recognized several news vans from Portland television stations. The case had attracted regional media attention, with coverage focusing on the dramatic elements of the story and the contrast between Marcus's public reputation and the charges he faced. Inside the courtroom, I saw Marcus for the first time since the night I found Sarah. He sat at the defense table wearing an expensive suit and an expression of dignified suffering that made me want to scream. His attorney Trevor Caldwell sat beside him, a silver-haired man in his 60s who exuded confidence and entitlement. Behind them in the gallery sat dozens of Marcus's supporters, people from the community who still believed in his innocence despite the evidence against him. On our side of the courtroom, the victim's side, we were far fewer in number. Sarah, Rachel, and I sat in the front row behind Patricia and her team. Deputy Chun sat nearby, along with a few other people I recognized as witnesses who had been interviewed during the investigation. The imbalance felt symbolic of the fight we faced. A small group armed with truth against a larger force committed to defending a lie. The judge entered and the proceedings began. Patricia presented evidence of the crime, including crime scene photographs, medical records documenting Sarah's injuries, and Deputy Chen's testimony about what I had told him the night I found Sarah, and what Sarah had said in her formal statement. Trevor Caldwell cross-examined aggressively, trying to establish inconsistencies or raise doubts about the evidence, but Patricia held her ground. The hearing lasted most of the day. I watched Sarah sitting motionless beside me, her hands clenched in her lap, her eyes fixed on Marcus as if she needed to see him restrained and powerless to believe he could not hurt her anymore. When the judge finally ruled that there was sufficient evidence to bind Marcus over for trial, and that he would remain in custody without bail, Sarah exhaled for what seemed like the first time in hours. Outside the courthouse, Patricia spoke briefly with reporters while keeping Sarah, Rachel, and me away from the cameras and microphones. She emphasized the strength of the evidence and the prosecution's commitment to seeking justice for Sarah. Trevor Caldwell gave his own statement, claiming the charges were based on the confused recollections of a seriously injured woman, and that the truth would emerge at trial. The competing narratives felt like a preview of the battle ahead. As we drove back to Eugene, Sarah finally spoke. I thought seeing him in handcuffs would make me feel safer, but I am still terrified. What if the jury believes his version instead of mine? What if I have to go through all of this and he still gets away with it? Then we fight harder, I said. We do everything possible to make sure the jury sees the truth. And we do not give up, no matter what happens. Promise me something, Sarah said quietly. Promise me that if I cannot do this, if testifying becomes too much and I fall apart, promise you will not be angry with me. Promise you will understand. I reached over and took her hand. You are not going to fall apart. You are the strongest person I know. But even if you do struggle, even if this is harder than either of us can imagine, I will never be angry with you. You are the victim here, Sarah. Whatever you feel and however you cope is valid. My job is to support you, not judge you. Rachel glanced at us in the rearview mirror. You are both warriors. You are fighting a system that too often protects abusers and doubts victims. The fact that you are still fighting, still refusing to let Marcus control the narrative, is incredibly brave. Whatever happens at trial, you should both be proud of what you have already accomplished. Her words settled over us like a blessing and a challenge. The preliminary hearing was over, but the real battle had not yet begun. The trial was still months away, and those months would be filled with preparation, investigation, and the constant stress of knowing that everything depended on our ability to convince 12 strangers that Marcus Hendricks was a monster who had tried to murder his pregnant wife. But we had taken the first step. The judge had looked at the evidence and determined that Marcus should stand trial for what he had done. That decision validated Sarah's courage in speaking her truth, and my determination to fight for her. It proved that despite Marcus's resources and reputation, the truth still mattered in some fundamental way. As we pulled into Rachel's driveway as the sun was setting, I looked at my sister and saw not just the trauma she carried but also the resilience she embodied. She had survived the unsurvivable and found the strength to seek justice. If she could do that, I could certainly find the strength to stand beside her through whatever came next. The fight was far from over. But we were ready for it. The weeks following the preliminary hearing brought a rhythm to our days that felt both purposeful and exhausting. Sarah attended physical therapy 3 times per week to rebuild strength in her injured body, worked with her trauma counselor twice weekly to process the psychological damage Marcus had inflicted, and met regularly with Patricia and the prosecution team to prepare for trial. I accompanied her to most of these appointments, taking notes, asking questions, and providing whatever support I could offer. Rachel maintained the household, ensuring we ate properly and took care of basic necessities that seemed overwhelming when every ounce of energy was directed toward the upcoming trial. I had taken a formal leave of absence from Cascade Elementary, a decision that had been easier than expected once I explained the situation to my principal. The school community rallied around us in unexpected ways, with parents and fellow teachers sending cards of support and small donations to help with the mounting expenses that came with pursuing justice. The gesture reminded me that while Marcus had his defenders, we had our own community of people who believed in Sarah and wanted to help. Patricia called me on a Tuesday morning in early January with news that shifted the trajectory of the entire case. Her voice carried an undercurrent of excitement that I had not heard from her before, the controlled enthusiasm of a prosecutor who had just discovered crucial evidence. Emma, I need you and Sarah to come to my office this afternoon. We have recovered data from Sarah's phone, and there is material here that significantly strengthens our case. How soon can you get here? We arrived at the district attorney's office within 2 hours. Patricia met us in the same conference room where we had first discussed the case, but this time the table was covered with printed documents, photographs, and what appeared to be transcripts of text messages. She gestured for us to sit and immediately began laying out what her team had discovered. Our technology forensics specialist was able to recover substantial data from Sarah's damaged phone. Text messages, emails, photographs, voice memos. The picture that emerges from this data is devastating for the defense and absolutely critical for our case. She slid a stack of printed text messages across the table. These are exchanges between Sarah and Marcus over the 6 months preceding the attack. They document escalating control, threats, and psychological abuse. I need to warn you that reading these will be difficult, but I also need you to confirm that these messages are authentic and that you can provide context for them. Sarah reached for the stack with a trembling hand. I moved my chair closer to hers so we could read together. The first message was from 4 months before the attack, sent from Marcus to Sarah at 2 in the morning. Where are you? You said you would be home by midnight. If you are with that guy from work again, I swear to God you will regret it. Sarah's response came 15 minutes later. I am at Jennifer's house. We lost track of time watching a movie. I am sorry. I am leaving now. Marcus's reply was immediate. You are always sorry, but you keep disrespecting me. When you get home, we are going to have a serious conversation about your behavior. I felt Sarah tense beside me as she read the exchange. She spoke quietly without looking up from the papers. I was not at Jennifer's house. I was actually at the animal shelter finishing paperwork for an adoption event. But Marcus had accused me earlier that day of flirting with a veterinarian who worked at the clinic, so I lied about where I was because I knew the truth would make him angrier. When I got home that night, he threw a glass against the wall and screamed at me for 20 minutes about how I was a terrible wife. Patricia made notes as Sarah spoke. This message establishes a pattern of Marcus monitoring Sarah's movements and responding with aggression when she did not comply with his expectations. It also shows Sarah modifying her behavior and even lying to try to prevent his violent reactions, which is typical of abuse victims. The next series of messages dated from 3 months before the attack showed Marcus sending Sarah dozens of texts throughout a single day, each one demanding to know where she was, who she was with, and when she would be home. Sarah had responded to each message within minutes, her replies short and placating. The final message of the day from Marcus read simply, "Good girl. See how much better things are when you cooperate." The condescension and control in those 3 sentences made my stomach turn. This was not the language of a loving husband. This was the language of someone who viewed his wife as property to be managed rather than a person to be respected. Further into the stack, the messages became more explicitly threatening. 2 months before the attack, Marcus had sent Sarah a message that read, "If you ever try to leave me, I will make sure you lose everything. Your job, your friends, your family. No one will believe anything you say about me. Everyone knows I am a good guy and you are unstable." Sarah had not responded to that message, perhaps recognizing that anything she said would only escalate his anger. But 2 days later, Marcus had sent another message as if the threat had never been made, asking what she wanted for dinner and saying he loved her. The whiplash between threats and affection was a classic abuse tactic designed to keep the victim off balance and uncertain. The most damning messages came from the 2 weeks before the attack, after Sarah had discovered Marcus's affair. She had confronted him via text while he was at a work site, writing, "I know about Vanessa. I found the messages on your phone. How could you do this to me? How could you do this to our baby?" Marcus's response demonstrated both his affair and his attitude toward the pregnancy. "Vanessa means nothing. She is just someone to talk to since you have been so difficult lately. And honestly, Sarah, I told you from the beginning I did not want this baby. You are the one who insisted on keeping it even though we both know we are not ready. Do not blame me for looking elsewhere when you stopped being the wife I married." The cruelty of his words took my breath away. He had turned his own infidelity and his rejection of their child into somehow being Sarah's fault. And according to the message timestamps, this exchange had occurred 3 days before he tried to kill her. Patricia pointed to another document on the table. We also recovered voice memos that Sarah recorded on her phone. Based on the dates and content, it appears she was documenting the abuse in case she ever needed evidence. This shows consciousness of wrongdoing on Marcus's part and Sarah's awareness that she might need to prove what was happening to her. She pressed play on a small recording device. Marcus's voice filled the room, loud and angry and absolutely unmistakable. "You think you can just do whatever you want? You think I work 60 hours a week so you can sit around and waste my money? I should have listened to my friends who told me not to marry you. You are pathetic, Sarah. You are weak and stupid, and the only reason I have not left you already is because divorce would be expensive and embarrassing." Sarah's voice came next, quiet and strained. "Please stop yelling. The neighbors will hear." "I do not care if the neighbors hear. Maybe they should know what kind of wife you are. Maybe everyone should know that behind closed doors you are nothing like the sweet girl they think they know." The recording continued for another minute with Marcus berating Sarah, while she mostly remained silent. When it ended, Patricia turned off the device and looked at Sarah with an expression that combined sympathy and professional satisfaction. "How many of these recordings do we have?" I asked. 11 total, recorded over a period of approximately 2 months. They all follow similar patterns. Marcus verbally abusing Sarah. Sarah trying to de-escalate. Marcus escalating further. In 3 of the recordings we can hear sounds consistent with objects being thrown or furniture being knocked over. In one recording we hear what sounds like a slap followed by Sarah crying. Sarah closed her eyes and I saw tears beginning to slide down her cheeks. Listening to her own victimization recorded and analyzed as legal evidence was clearly re-traumatizing. But she did not ask Patricia to stop. She wanted justice more than she wanted to avoid pain. Patricia continued with careful professionalism. We also recovered photographs from Sarah's phone that show injuries at various stages of healing. Bruises on her arms, a split lip, finger-shaped marks on her throat. Some of these photos are timestamped just days before the attack. They provide visual documentation of the physical abuse Marcus inflicted. She laid out printed copies of the photos. I recognized Sarah in each one, but the woman in these images looked haunted and defeated in ways that the Sarah I thought I knew had never appeared. She had hidden this suffering so completely that I had seen none of it during our visits and phone calls. The guilt of having failed to notice threatened to overwhelm me, but I pushed it aside. Sarah needed me focused on the present, not consumed by past failures. There is one more piece of evidence that I believe will be decisive at trial, Patricia said. She pulled out a final document and placed it in front of us. 2 days before the attack, Sarah drafted an email to you, Emma, but never sent it. The draft was saved on her phone. I would like you to read it. The email was addressed to me with the subject line, "I need help." The body of the message read, "Emma, I do not know how to tell you this, so I am just going to say it. Marcus has been hurting me. Not just emotionally, though that too, but physically. He hits me when he gets angry. He chokes me when I try to stand up to him. He threatens me constantly. I have been trying to pretend everything is fine because I am ashamed and scared and I do not know what to do. But I am pregnant and I am terrified of what he might do to me and the baby. He wants me to get an abortion and I refuse. And his anger is getting worse every day. I need help getting out. I need somewhere safe to go. I know you will think I should have told you sooner and you are right, but I kept hoping things would get better. They are not getting better. They are getting worse. Can I come stay with you? I am afraid if I stay here much longer, something terrible is going to happen. I love you. Sarah." The email she had never sent. The cry for help that had remained trapped in her phone as a draft, discovered only after Marcus had tried to silence her permanently. If she had sent this email, if I had received it 2 days before the attack, would things have turned out differently? Could I have gotten her out before Marcus pushed her off that cliff? This email demonstrates that Sarah was planning to leave Marcus and was reaching out for help, Patricia explained. It establishes her state of mind in the days before the attack and shows that Marcus's claim of an accidental fall is impossible. Sarah was not a woman who would run toward a cliff edge in an emotional state. She was a woman who was methodically planning her escape, and who Marcus attacked because he discovered her plans. Sarah was crying openly now, her shoulders shaking with sobs that came from some deep place of grief and relief. I put my arms around her and held her while she cried, letting her release the emotions that the evidence had brought flooding back. When she finally composed herself enough to speak, her voice was hoarse but determined. I did not send that email because I was afraid Marcus would find it somehow. He checked my phone constantly. He knew all my passwords. I was going to wait until I was actually ready to leave before reaching out to Emma, because I knew once I told her the truth, there would be no going back. I would have to follow through. And Marcus discovered you were planning to leave, Patricia said. That is what triggered the attack. Abusers are most dangerous when their victims try to escape, because they lose control. Marcus could not tolerate the thought of you leaving, so he decided to eliminate you instead. How does this evidence change the case? I asked. It transforms it completely. The defense's strategy has been to portray Marcus as a loving husband devastated by an accident that nearly killed his wife. They want the jury to see him as a victim of circumstance, rather than a perpetrator of violence. This evidence destroys that narrative entirely. The text messages, the voice recordings, the photographs, and especially that unsent email create an undeniable record of abuse and Sarah's fear of Marcus. The jury will not be able to dismiss her testimony as the confused recollections of someone with a head injury. They will see documented proof that everything she says about Marcus is true. Patricia began organizing the evidence back into folders. Trevor Caldwell is going to fight hard to keep some of this evidence out of trial. He will argue that the text messages are taken out of context, that the voice recordings were made without Marcus's consent and therefore violate his privacy rights, that the photographs do not definitively show Marcus caused the injuries. But I am confident the judge will allow most if not all of this evidence because it directly relates to establishing Marcus's motive and pattern of behavior. When will the trial start? Sarah asked. The court has scheduled it for late March, approximately 3 months from now. That gives us time to prepare thoroughly and to continue investigating. We still need to interview Vanessa Clark about the affair, which may provide additional motive evidence. We also want to talk to more of Marcus's friends and business associates to see if anyone observed troubling behavior that contradicts his public persona. She looked at both of us seriously. I need you both to understand that once this evidence becomes part of the public record, Sarah's privacy will be completely gone. The media will report on the text messages and the recordings. People will hear Marcus verbally abusing her. They will see the photographs of her injuries. This will be incredibly invasive and painful. But it is also necessary to ensure justice. Sarah straightened in her chair, wiping the last tears from her face. I do not care about my privacy anymore. I care about making sure Marcus cannot do this to anyone else. If exposing what he did to me helps accomplish that, then it is worth it. Her courage in that moment took my breath away. She had been broken and beaten and nearly killed. Yet she was willing to expose her most painful and private moments to public scrutiny, if it meant holding her abuser accountable. That level of bravery was something I had never imagined I would witness, let alone see in my own sister. Over the following weeks, Patricia and her team continued building the case with meticulous attention to detail. They deposed witnesses, reviewed financial records to establish Marcus's expenditures related to the affair, and worked with expert witnesses who would testify about domestic violence patterns and traumatic brain injury effects on memory. Every piece of the puzzle was being carefully assembled into a comprehensive picture of Marcus's guilt. Deputy Chan successfully interviewed Vanessa Clark, the woman Marcus had been having an affair with. She initially denied any inappropriate relationship, but eventually admitted the truth when confronted with phone records and text message evidence. She claimed she had not known Marcus was married at first, though the timeline of their relationship suggested otherwise. More importantly, she confirmed that Marcus had complained repeatedly about his wife being pregnant and had expressed anger about being trapped in a marriage he no longer wanted. Her testimony would provide crucial corroboration of Marcus's motive. The prosecution also tracked down 2 of Marcus's former employees, who came forward with disturbing information about his character. Both men reported witnessing Marcus lose his temper on job sites in ways that involved throwing tools, punching walls, and screaming at workers who made mistakes. One recalled Marcus making comments about his wife that were demeaning and controlling, including a statement that he kept her on a short leash because women could not be trusted to make their own decisions. This testimony would help establish that Marcus's violent and controlling behavior was not limited to his relationship with Sarah, but was a consistent pattern across multiple contexts. As the trial date approached, Sarah and I both struggled with anxiety and anticipation. The waiting was almost worse than the attack itself had been, because at least during the immediate crisis there had been concrete actions to take and problems to solve. Now we simply had to trust that the legal system would work as it was supposed to, that the evidence would speak clearly, and that 12 jurors would see through Marcus's carefully constructed facade to the monster underneath. Sarah's physical recovery continued slowly but steadily. Her broken bones healed and her mobility improved through diligent physical therapy. The neurologist reported that her cognitive function appeared to be returning to normal levels, though she still experienced occasional headaches and memory gaps related to the traumatic brain injury. Psychologically, the damage was deeper and would take much longer to heal. She still had nightmares and panic attacks. She still checked locks compulsively and startled at sudden movements. But she was also learning coping strategies through therapy and finding strength in the community of support that had formed around her. One evening about 2 weeks before the trial was scheduled to begin, Sarah and I sat together in Rachel's living room after Rachel had gone to bed. We had been reviewing Sarah's testimony preparation materials, going over the questions Patricia would ask and the likely cross-examination from Trevor Caldwell. Sarah set down the papers and looked at me with an expression I could not quite read. "I need to tell you something," she said quietly. "Something I have not told anyone, not even Patricia or my therapist." I felt a chill of apprehension but kept my voice calm. "You can tell me anything." The night Marcus pushed me off that cliff, after I landed in the blackberry bushes and realized I was still alive, I had a choice. I could try to crawl for help, which seemed impossible given how badly I was hurt, or I could just stay there and let the cold or the injuries finish what Marcus started. It would have been easier to give up. So much easier. She paused and I waited, not wanting to interrupt whatever she needed to say. "But I thought about you. I thought about how devastated you would be if I died. How you would spend the rest of your life wondering if you could have saved me if you had known what was happening. I thought about Marcus getting away with killing me and going on to hurt someone else. And I thought about our parents and how they taught us to never give up, to always fight for what is right even when it is hard. So I started crawling." Tears were streaming down both our faces now. Every inch was agony. Every movement made me think I was going to pass out or die. But I kept thinking about you driving toward me, kept imagining seeing your face, kept telling myself I just had to make it to the road. And somehow I did. I crawled for almost 2 hours to get to where you found me. 2 hours of pain and fear and determination because I refused to let Marcus win. She took my hand and squeezed it tightly. "I want you to know that whatever happens at trial, whether Marcus is convicted or acquitted, whether the jury believes me or dismisses my testimony, I have already won. I survived when he wanted me dead. I found the courage to tell the truth when he thought he had silenced me forever. I am sitting here with you right now when I should be in a grave somewhere. That is victory, Emma. Everything else is just details." Her words struck me with the force of revelation. She was right. Marcus had tried to destroy her and he had failed. He had tried to silence her and she had spoken anyway. He had tried to make her disappear and instead she had become more visible than ever. Her story inspiring others and her courage undeniable. The trial outcome mattered enormously for justice and accountability. But Sarah had already demonstrated something far more important than any jury verdict could provide. She had proven that survival itself was a form of resistance, that refusing to be erased was its own kind of triumph. "You are the bravest person I have ever known," I told her. "And no matter what happens in that courtroom, I am going to make sure everyone knows what you survived and how hard you fought. Your story matters, Sarah. You matter." She smiled through her tears, a genuine smile that reached her eyes for the first time since I had found her in that ditch. "Then let us go finish this. Let us walk into that courtroom and tell the truth and trust that it will be enough." The evidence we had gathered, the testimony we had prepared, and the truth we carried would all be tested in the crucible of trial. But we were ready. Sarah had survived the unsurvivable and found the strength to seek justice. I had stood beside her every step of the way, and would continue standing beside her through whatever came next. Together, we were stronger than Marcus had ever imagined possible. And together we were going to show him and everyone watching that victims could become survivors, and survivors could become warriors. The trial was about to begin, and we were ready for battle. The Coos County Courthouse stood against a gray March sky on the morning the trial began, its stone facade imposing and indifferent to the human drama about to unfold within its walls. Sarah, Rachel, and I arrived 45 minutes early, hoping to avoid the crowd of reporters and onlookers that Patricia had warned us would be present. Our strategy failed. The courthouse steps were already packed with news crews from Portland, Eugene, and even Seattle, their cameras and microphones ready to capture whatever footage they could use for the evening broadcasts. Deputy Chun met us at a side entrance, guiding us through a service corridor that allowed us to bypass the media circus. His presence was both practical and comforting, a reminder that law enforcement believed in Sarah's case and was committed to seeing justice done. We emerged into a quiet hallway outside the courtroom where Patricia and her team had set up a makeshift command center, their arms loaded with boxes of evidence and documents. Patricia looked up from her conversation with a paralegal and immediately came over to greet us. She wore a dark navy suit that projected authority and competence, her expression focused but calm. She had explained to us weeks ago that trials were performances as much as they were searches for truth, that every gesture and word choice mattered in shaping how the jury perceived the parties involved. Today her performance began in earnest. "Sarah, how are you feeling?" Patricia asked, taking my sister's hands in hers. "Terrified," Sarah admitted, "but ready. I have been waiting for this day for 4 months. I want to look Marcus in the eye and tell everyone what he did to me. You are going to get that chance, but not today. Opening statements will happen this morning, and then we will begin calling our witnesses. You will not testify until later in the trial, probably next week. I want the jury to hear from other witnesses first, to establish the context of abuse and violence before they hear directly from you. That way your testimony becomes the capstone of a comprehensive narrative, rather than an isolated accusation." She turned to me. "Emma, you will likely be called to testify tomorrow or the day after. We need to establish what Sarah told you immediately after the attack, before any possibility that her memories could have been influenced by suggestion or coaching. Your testimony provides the freshest account of Sarah's accusations against Marcus." The courtroom doors opened and we filed inside, taking our seats in the front row of the gallery behind the prosecution table. The room was smaller than I had expected, paneled in dark wood that absorbed light and created an atmosphere of somber formality. The jury box sat empty, waiting for the 12 citizens who would decide Marcus's fate. The judge's bench loomed at the front of the room, elevated and imposing. And at the defense table sat Marcus Hendricks and his attorney Trevor Caldwell, both dressed in expensive suits and wearing expressions of dignified confidence. This was the first time Sarah had seen Marcus since the night he tried to kill her. I felt her entire body tense beside me, her breathing becoming shallow and rapid. I took her hand and held it tightly, trying to offer whatever strength I could through simple physical contact. She did not take her eyes off Marcus, as if she needed to prove to herself that he was real, that he was here, that he would finally be held accountable. Marcus glanced back at the gallery, his eyes scanning the crowd of supporters who had come to watch the trial. When his gaze fell on Sarah, something flickered across his face too quickly for me to identify. Surprise that she was actually here? Fear that she intended to testify? Anger that she had survived? Whatever the emotion was, he quickly composed his features into a mask of sorrowful concern, the expression of a wrongly accused man enduring an unjust ordeal with patience and dignity. The performance made me sick. This was the same man who had beaten his pregnant wife, pushed her off a cliff, and left her for dead. Yet here he sat, playing the role of victim with such conviction that I could see some of the jurors looking at him with sympathy as they filed into the jury box. Patricia had warned us this would happen, that Caldwell had spent months cultivating an image of Marcus as a devoted husband falsely accused, but seeing it in action was infuriating. Judge Margaret Whitmore entered the courtroom, her black robe flowing behind her as she took her seat behind the bench. She was in her early 60s, with steel gray hair and sharp eyes that suggested she had seen every trick defense attorneys attempted and was not easily fooled. Patricia had expressed cautious optimism about drawing Judge Whitmore for this trial, noting that she had a reputation for being fair but firm, and for not tolerating attempts to manipulate the proceedings. After preliminary instructions to the jury about their responsibilities and the legal standards they would apply, Judge Whitmore invited the prosecution to deliver its opening statement. Patricia rose from her chair with deliberate grace, buttoned her suit jacket, and approached the jury box. She made eye contact with each juror before beginning to speak, establishing a connection that would be crucial throughout the trial. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about power and control. It is about a man who believed he owned his wife, who believed he had the right to dictate every aspect of her life, and who attempted to murder her when she finally decided to leave him. Over the next several days, you are going to hear testimony and see evidence that tells the story of Sarah Hendricks, a woman who endured months of escalating abuse at the hands of her husband Marcus. You will hear about the psychological torture he inflicted, the threats he made, the violence he perpetrated. And you will hear about the night he decided that if he could not control Sarah, he would eliminate her. Patricia's voice was calm and measured, presenting the facts without melodrama, but with absolute clarity. She outlined the prosecution's case methodically, describing the evidence the jury would see and the witnesses who would testify. She explained how text messages, voice recordings, and photographs would document the pattern of abuse. She described the physical evidence from the crime scene that proved Marcus had struck Sarah with a wine bottle and pushed her off the cliff behind their home. She emphasized Sarah's 2-hour crawl to reach the road, a journey that demonstrated both the severity of her injuries and her determination to survive. The defense is going to try to convince you that this was a tragic accident, that Sarah fell during an argument, and that Marcus is devastated by what happened. But the evidence will show you that this was no accident. This was attempted murder, carefully concealed but ultimately exposed by Sarah's courage in surviving and speaking the truth. When you have heard all the evidence and all the testimony, I am confident you will have no doubt about Marcus Hendricks's guilt. She returned to her seat and Trevor Caldwell rose for the defense opening statement. He was older than Patricia, with silver hair and the practiced charm of someone who had spent decades persuading juries to doubt what seemed obvious. He approached the jury box with a sympathetic smile, positioning himself as a reasonable man asking reasonable people to keep an open mind. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.